So we have our final panel on the emerging landscape in blockchain, which will be moderated by one of our alumni, Spencer Farrar. And Spencer will be joined by Jason Levy, one of the co-founders of Story Protocol, and Michelle Munson, the founder of Alluvio, and Chetan Nandakumar, head of product at Jensen. So thank you to all of our panelists. I'll let Spencer take it away.
No? Okay, perfect. Awesome. We'll get started because I have a flight at 6. But just quickly, I'll introduce myself, give an outline kind of the panel, and then jump into the questions. I'm a partner at Theory Ventures. We're a $238 million fund. We're a data fund. We're thesis-driven. We take a concentrated approach, so we make 12 to 15 investments. Most firms make about 30 to 40. I cut my teeth mostly in machine learning and crypto. Started my career in structured credit, worked at a hedge fund in New York City, was one of the first investors in SWE or Miston Labs, did things like Arbitrum as well, and then built an options trading platform on Solana. Let's see, just to kind of give an outline, I think what's really interesting to me is we actually look to back real businesses, and often I think in crypto, people are looking for utility, and one of the questions I get from many of my investors is, what can I actually do with this technology today? And so I'm super excited to have this panel because if I were to put a list of companies together, you guys would be right at the top of the list. So maybe it would be really, really great if we could just talk about, in the process of building a business, I think it's really important to architecturally design your business in a way that might be advantageous to competing against incumbents or things like that, and there are many, many trade-offs. So architecturally, you guys have all decided to build, using blockchain infrastructure. So I'd be curious if you could kind of elaborate on why that is, why you chose to build using, these architectural decisions. Just to get started, I think that'd be awesome.
Sounds great. Is the mic working? Okay. First of all, I appreciate you calling us a real business because when I tell friends and especially extended family that I co-founded a crypto company, they immediately assume that it is not a real business, and so I'm going to cite you on that. Brief introduction, I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders of Story Protocol. What we do is we focus on the realm of intellectual property, specifically intellectual property of creative work. Think books, think movies, think characters, think NFTs, think even meme coins could be considered in some ways intellectual property. And our belief is that currently intellectual property is essentially trapped in a silo. They're trapped in little prisons. They're what we call static IP, static intellectual property. And the reason for that is that anytime anyone wants to use someone else's intellectual property, it requires a pen and paper process with lawyers on a one-to-one basis to do so. And yet what's happening in the world is that with the advent of the internet and much more recently with the advent of Gen AI, these intellectual properties want to grow and spread and flourish in a much, much more scalable way. So what we do with our protocol is we capture the intellectual property on the blockchain, just to get to your question in one moment, and we convert it into what we call a programmable IP in the same sense that you can think of money as programmable in the crypto space, meaning that the holder of the IP can set or program a set of rules that define how other people can use that IP. And I'm excited to share some examples of that throughout this panel. To answer your question directly, the reason this requires blockchain is that when you're asking people to trust others essentially with their intellectual property and say, you can go ahead and use our sort of precious resource here, but only if you follow the rules, trust and transparency are absolutely critical. And so when I talk to anyone, whether it's in the crypto space or in the Hollywood space, and tell them about the advantages of registering on our protocol, to them it's very, very important that they can trust that infrastructure. So when I tell them that even we, if we wanted to, couldn't change the terms that you've set, that for them is a really important consideration.
Makes a ton of sense, thanks. Michelle?
Well, just following on in this same kind of theme, first of all, just a little about myself. I'm Michelle Munson, and I've been working in building protocols for content over the internet for quite a long time. And like Jason, had a lot of inspiration when I discovered blockchain, along with some of my colleagues, to apply its capabilities toward decentralized content distribution. And we at Alluvio created a ground-up protocol called the Content Fabric Protocol that provides for end-to-end owner publishing control, storage, and component-based distribution in a scalable, open network. And the Fabric is meant to be, to Spencer's question, a direct competitor to traditional CDNs, like you would find from an Akamai, for example, or a Fastly, and a cloud media stack, like you would find from AWS's media stack. And the protocol takes some of the principles of end-to-end design and encapsulates basically what you think of as publishing, transcoding, packaging, storage, and then just-in-time retrieval, routing, and composite-based serving of media to the user into an end-to-end protocol. And that has a couple of key points, I think, for decentralized philosophy. The first is the utility value. The architecture of this is super efficient. It removes much of the resource used in creating multivariant file-based workflows. And if you know a little bit about video and have kind of followed how it's grown up on the internet, most of what you see today is basically versions of file stored media that's put through a more traditional kind of multi-workflow sort of pipeline. So that efficiency changes things a lot. Number one, it takes a lot of cost. Two, it also takes out a lot of resource usage. And then the other side, of course, is that the cryptography of the protocol and the relationship to an on-chain version. Protocols itself is a full blockchain. The relationship to that allows for having owner control from the point of publishing to the authorization for any streaming derivative. And that's really important to the points that Jason made, so it makes it possible for an owner of creative IP to not only leverage and reuse their media, but also to be able to directly authorize an end user to it. And if you followed the way media has been on the internet for the last 20 years, it's nothing like that. There's always this intermediary platform that is basically between you and the audience. So I'll say one more thing to answer your question, Spencer, that's really important. It's top of mind for me. I'm about to go to the NAB show in Las Vegas, and it couldn't be more different than this audience with respect to blockchain. Most of the people there who operate major media companies and brands, they're either terrified of blockchain or they've confused it with a lot of the scams that have gone on, or they feel like, why should we bother? We're all looking at AI, right? And I think what really behooves us in this community, we are part of the Accelerator, we're deeply committed to the principles of this, is to be able to really manifest applications that people can actually use, that make sense to them, that have real value. And that is extremely hard without a direct application reach, in my opinion.
Hi everyone, my name is Chetan Nandakumar, and I'm the head of product for Jensen. And my background is that I'm actually a Cal undergrad, EECS, and I'm also a Cal PhD in neuroscience and AI. And at Jensen, what we're doing is we are building a decentralized compute protocol for ML. So our long-term vision for the world and for the internet is that AI and ML is going to be a dominant user and player on the internet, as well as in all of our lives. And we believe that this is going to be a fundamentally different future, and we need a new commons for this type of future. And so what we're doing is that this compute protocol, we're using blockchain to build it, because blockchain is the only way to actually build a digital commons. And so the way our commons will work, at least the sort of the basic version is that it'll allow any AI agent or any person who's training an AI model to essentially submit their job to this protocol, and the protocol will be able to train or fine-tune that model, and then return the weights of that trained model back to the end user. And so by making this a protocol, it's actually a kind of a deep conceptual shift. Right now, if you want to train an AI model, you would use AWS or you would use GCP to essentially train those models. But we believe that it needs to be, this type of infrastructure needs to be a permissionless, open resource. And if you just take an analog with the current internet, imagine right now if you wanted to send a piece of data on the internet, you'd have to go through AWS to actually send that piece of data. Well, we wouldn't have the internet we have now. The only way that the internet happens as we have now is where we have essentially a common protocol for information sharing called TCP/IP. And likewise, we believe that so if we had if we had to go through a centralized company to send information, the internet we have now would be incredibly limited. And likewise, in the AI world, we believe that if everyone is limited through centralized entities, that world would be very limited. So hence the need for a digital commons around AI. Thank you.
That's awesome. I mean, so to me, what really resonates is you have immutability of data information, you have operational efficiencies, new frameworks that you're introducing. I think what would be really interesting if we unpack that a little bit, maybe for you two at the end, you're competing directly with hyperscalers. You're competing against legacy legal systems. I'd be really interested in understanding maybe some of the efficiencies that you guys gain from using these systems. I know, Michelle, you're seeing 80% gains in efficiency and 50x improvement in costs at times.
Yeah, and I think that, this is really at least half of the massive opportunity. And some of this is domain specific, so forgive me if you've not lived in video content distribution for years like I have, but there is such a, let's say, inefficient and not content native approach to how this has been done, and because video is so big and so popular, there's been very little attention to changing that. And the Fabric protocol, partially because of its decentralization and partially just because of its innovation, the way it works, allows for changing the costs at scale massively. And I'll give you 3 examples straight off the top. So we are hosting the entire Sony Pictures library in the Fabric this year after 2 years of working with Sony Pictures on this kind of thing, because they realized they could use the same single source object to serve all of their title variants. And how much does it save them? Many X. And I don't know the exact number, but many X, because it was a big part of the calculus to decide to put all 200,000 titles that all of Sony Pictures has into this model. A second use case that's like this is one of our major streaming clients. You guys might know UEFA. They are the European soccer. After FIFA, probably the biggest organization in the world for soccer. And last fall, there were 2 reasons that we were successful with them. The first was performance gains that you can get out of this kind of decentralized approach that you can't get out of traditional clouds or CDNs. We won a trial with them on the basis of ultra low latency streaming. And then from there, they started to uncover the cost advantages. And now they have us stacked up for a number of use cases based on that, where they're really trying to just be able to do more with less. And then I want to say one more thing about the data side to this. Because of AI bringing, you're going to talk about, because of AI bringing so much data natively to the media and such a fixation on that opportunity, but then this inability to sort of get it into a traditional workflow, the decentralized architecture takes huge cost out of that too, because the data lives with the media. And that opens up so many possibilities to act upon it. And examples of this, guys, that happen all day long in professional sports are creating clips and highlights. Instead of recording the live stream and then making a copy, so you have a VOD, and then cutting a clip, right? Instead, you can do all of that in place with the data driving that in this kind of decentralized programmable approach. And we inspired the programmability in the fabric from Ethereum programmability, basically looking at what smart contracts were doing in that domain and making a content protocol that does that. That's what I think real blockchain inspiration is all about, and it's quite moving in terms of what it can do. The challenge in talking about it is, I've found, and I do have to deal with a lot of mainstream customers every day, is you can't really put that in their face. They buy the benefits. They're afraid of the how.
Yeah, no,
Repeat the
no,
question
and
again?
I mean, makes a ton of sense to me. I think the messaging is something I think about a lot, which is an ideal world, the buyer is just using a better technology. And you're doing an apple to apple comparison, and it's very easy for them to understand. But I think maybe to kind of flip the question on its head, I think some of the pushback with like decentralized compute or actual training of models is the actual latency that's introduced. So maybe you could discuss from a latency perspective, or maybe even the workloads that you guys are managing and jobs that you're managing on behalf of users. Maybe it's a specific wedge or angle that you guys are focused on, but competing against hyperscalers on the supply side is an intimidating thing. So I guess what's your focus and edge in the market today?
Yeah, so using a decentralized approach certainly introduces some new challenges. And there's a lot of advantages and there's some new challenges. And with latency specifically, there's actually, when you look at training and fine-tuning, there's a spectrum of needs. So you have like full pre-training a model, and currently requires, for most models, a very low latency. But then there's the other side of the spectrum, fine-tuning a model, which can happen on a single machine. And we believe, so right now we're focused, we're going to be rolling in our DevNet probably at the end of this year or hopefully early next year. And we believe, and we're going to be targeting fine-tuning in that. But as we expand, we believe that we can also target quite a lot more. There's a lot of exciting research happening. There's certainly recently a paper called Galore, which talked about being able to fine-tune essentially a foundation model using RTX 4090s. And so there's, one of the things that's both exciting and challenging about the world we live in with AI and blockchain is that we're still really early with both. And there's so much blue sky in terms of new research that can really change what's possible.
Thanks. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. And then I was actually kind of reading up on that paper, so it's pretty exciting. Jason, maybe I think what would be really interesting to me is when you start to think about legal infrastructure being built on a blockchain, many people for a long time were talking about title being built on a blockchain or things like that. And I think what's interesting is if there's a dispute of some sort, specifically with copyright or IP, how do you guys handle that today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before answering that, let me just give an example of I think how this technology may be used, and then I'll answer that question in that context. So last year there was an AI gen expert who took a song by Drake and a song by The Weeknd and used Gen AI to combine those two styles to make a new song. And he published that song on a bunch of streaming services, on Spotify, on Apple Music, on SoundCloud, and it starts to get reach, and it starts to make money. And Universal Music Group then filed a copyright claim to have it taken down. And when I look at that scenario, what I say is that this was actually a lose-lose situation for everyone that could have been a win-win for everyone. Because I don't know Drake and The Weeknd's personal views on AI derivative works, but let's say they're open to it. This was a case where their song styles could have been expanded to a wider audience. They could have earned more money. The AI creator could have earned money. The platforms that it was published on could have earned money. But none of that happened because there was no legal infrastructure to make that an authorized derivative. So in my view, what should have happened is Drake and The Weeknd should have, well, frankly, they should have used Story Protocol had it been available last year. And they should have opened up as one of the authorized derivatives. Drake should have said, I'm okay with any AI remix of my song as long as there's no hate speech and as long as I get 70% of the revenue because I'm Drake and that's what I'm entitled to. That would have actually been way better for everyone. And in reference to your last question about efficiency, currently that deal would have been a one-to-one deal between all of those parties, as opposed to any artist being able to set their own terms and anyone being able to participate on those terms. To your question about a dispute, one thing that I think is overlooked, there's all kinds of ways that we're exploring to sort of scale disputes. One thing I would say, or dispute resolutions, one thing I would say about it is that the current legal system, as much as we may want to look down upon it, it actually has a mechanism for doing this. And so the one that I just cited is that mechanism, which is that in that case, Universal Music Group filed a copyright claim and the current legal system took care of it. Now, that may not be the most scalable. And it's important to note that that scale is really only relevant when people make money. People don't tend to be so concerned about copyright claims or disputes when money's not involved. So that actually reduces the volume of sort of relevant disputes. But my answer to that would be we're actually internally exploring some really interesting ideas for how to scale dispute resolution. But the legal system actually takes care of that in some ways for us in a less scalable way.
If I could add something, because this is really exciting with regard to what Jason's talking about. Finally, the mainstream guys are really paying attention to provenance. Obviously, Gen AI took them by storm, and I want to tell you guys this as a backstory anecdote. So there is what's known as an accelerator project across the professional media companies, being sponsored by, let me name the names, CBS, Paramount, BBC, and participants from major tech companies, you would guess, like Adobe and Microsoft, and startup companies like ours, for example, that has decided to seriously go after content provenance. In this year of an election, in this year of obviously the Gen AI overhang of Sora and everything else, and for the first time since I've been working in blockchain, these guys are taking this really seriously. They are scared and they want solutions for this. And I think this is our opportunity. Here are the two things I've observed. First, I got asked to give a talk at a pretty traditionally video conference about content provenance. First time. And how you would do it cryptographically. And I did a critique of the C2PA. Maybe you guys should get involved and be an alternative to the C2PA. The second thing that has happened is that people are willing to open their brains to the cryptography, blockchain cryptography, on-chain versioning, authorization with decentralized trust, new trustless crypto. In my career, those people are like, don't bother me with that. That's too wonky.
Yeah. If anyone knows Drake, first of all, connect them to Jason afterwards so we can fix this issue. But yeah, I mean, I think with generative AI, right, people are taking provenance very seriously, and it's kind of a scary loaded gun that everyone's looking down at. I think what you kind of alluded to is interesting to me, which is it seems like people are more receptive now in 2020 to 2024 to these types of businesses. As you guys start to build out your businesses over time, I'm curious if your go-to-markets look any different in comparison to maybe a traditional business. Or are you really just selling, underlying technology? Curious if you guys have experienced, any nuances there.
Yeah. So with AI, it's obviously there's a lot changing with AI. I believe that in the far future, we're going to see a lot of AI agents on the internet. A lot of folks are already talking about that. That's really going to be a big shift for society. But what I think is exciting about what we're doing in the AI space is that what we're doing doesn't require that. Is that we're hopefully, our goal is to offer a better, a more cost-effective and more accessible product for anyone doing anything with AI. And so that exists, and so that applies to any Web 2 company, any hobbyist, and likewise. And so our target market is really startups and hobbyists, and we believe that'll be alive and kicking for the next couple years. And then, of course, as things transition in bigger ways with agents, both from the centralized perspective and a decentralized perspective, we believe that we'll be well positioned to support that world as well.
That makes sense. One thing I'd be curious to get your guys' opinion on is many people, I think, grapple with this idea of a token and how do you value it. Investors, traditional business folks, many projects are using it as an incentive to bootstrap supply, maybe in Jensen's case, if you were to do that one day. Something I think about is like a finance course I took here, which was like the cost of capital and cost of capital in funding businesses. And traditionally, equity, has the highest cost of capital. And so within crypto, you have networks, you have tokens, and many of these projects, many of these DeepIn projects, are using tokens to bootstrap supply or interest in a project. But something I am conscious of is long-term sustainability of these businesses. If you're using tokens to incentivize someone joining a network or participating in a business. I'm curious how you guys think about the cost of capital in general when using tokens.
I was going to say, I can tell, I think, a very real-world sort of story about this, because the Content Fabric is built rigorously as a utility network. The nodes participate under authentication and authorization as an address. They do everything in a trustless way. We took the trouble to make sure that the key management is also fully decentralized. Everything's set up, and there's even an LVD flow internally. We put lots of work into that. Well, 2 points. Media companies and our buyers are interested in using the thing. They don't care about contributing to it. And that's a little bit of a surprise to all of us here, because we think there's perfect incentives. You could offset your costs. All you have to do is participate in that. And people don't think that way, first and foremost. I think that's one point. Doesn't mean it won't change, like all things like this, but that's one thing. I think the second thing that is interesting about this question is what's happened in the United States. So I'll just take a position here and say that I try to operate as a mainstream business. I didn't want to take lots of risks with the US government. I don't want to waste my capital, which is very precious, on lawyers fighting with the SEC. I just can't stand that. I already had to spend enough money on lawyers to help form things. And so the last 2 years in the United States for blockchain companies, if you are not forming an external entity, means that you can't even touch that, because something at least is going to cost you hiring somebody to justify what you did, right? So I think that's issue number 2, which we all know so well, but still hasn't changed enough or fast enough, right? So I think this is an untapped opportunity for us in the Fabric. All of our mojo's going into use and what value it brings to the using companies, where they could get double value, being in the utility, being paid for that too.
I think, Spencer, we should probably have one more question.
Okay, great.
And then we'll go on to the next section.
Okay, awesome. Dreaming big, the world is your oyster. Ideally, all of your companies are huge in the coming years. What are you excited about? What does an ideal world look like in 5 to 10 years for each of you guys?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. For me, what I would love to see in the next 5, 10 years and beyond is it might not be all, but the majority of content being registered on the blockchain so that it can take advantage of the efficiencies of this permissionless expansion. And I really see this growing alongside Gen AI growing. I was on a panel yesterday about the intersection between AI and blockchain, and one analogy that I like to give is back in the days of Napster and iTunes. I don't know if everyone here is old enough to remember those days, but this was the days where broadband internet was becoming popular, and a service called Napster comes out that allows people to share music instantly over the internet. And it's way better than going to Tower Records and buying a physical CD. The problem is that it was illegal because you weren't paying for the music. And so the legal system starts to do what the legal system does and starts to take actions to shut that down. And only when Apple came along with its music store, I was at Apple back in those days, and then later Spotify and these other companies, were we able to take advantage of that technological breakthrough. And I think the same thing is happening now, both with broadband internet and more recently with Gen AI, which is that we have this incredible new way to generate content. It essentially, within a few years, will make anyone like a Hollywood creator. But the legal system currently cannot catch up. And when the legal system can't catch up, it puts a lid on realizing the value of that new technology. So when I look forward 5 to 10 years, I see a scenario in which we're taking advantage of not just Gen AI, but Gen AI and other new technologies, and we're actually realizing the commercial value of that because we have a scalable infrastructure behind it.
That's awesome. What about you guys? Anything to add?
I'm sorry I talk so much, but I'll say one more thing in response to this. So I'm thinking a little bit in Russian doll style. I see this sort of short, medium term, and then the big. The short, medium term for us is all about this utility value. There is a real stickiness in this right now. Media industry is really turned on its head to try to improve profitability. They've got to bring the cost down, and they're trapped with complexity, and it's really a moment to grow on that basis. And we've had a lot of success around that, and I think that's going to continue to be the driver for the next 2 or 3 years. But the meta driver is the one you said, which is Gen AI changing everything about creativity and people waking up to the fact that all of a sudden creative work has so much more value. And how am I going to prove what's real? How am I going to protect? And how am I going to monetize what I have? And that's the huge opportunity, in my view.
For us, we believe that AI is a transformative force, and we believe that the best way to realize its positive potential is to really allow it to be unleashed. And we believe that building digital commons around it is critical for that to happen. So, so we're very excited about what's possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, it's just an absolute pleasure to be up here with you guys, and clearly you're building, companies that are on the cutting edge. So I really appreciate the time and was glad to be able to be on a panel with all of you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And I think we have a networking session at the end after the BBX pitches. So hopefully you can stay around and talk to some of the audience here, because I'm sure they'll have questions. So thank you very much.